Welcome to Exploration Dreamland, a quiet read aloud of the writings of explorers of the real world and the worlds of imagination. Drop anchor, relax into your comfortable bunk, and drift off to Dreamland with us as we read a lightly edited version of The Blazing World by Margaret Cavendish from 1666, considered to be the first science fiction book written by a woman. It's a fascinating glimpse into the ideas of science and philosophy at that time. The book will be read in order, so if you would like to begin at the beginning, please start with Season 5, Episode 87. If you would like to stay in touch between episodes, you can follow us on Blue Sky, Instagram, or Facebook at Exploration Dreamland. If you have a moment to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, it helps more than you know. You can also hear our episodes on YouTube. If you are listening there, please like our episodes and leave a comment for us. We love hearing from you. Now, take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, relax any tension in your muscles. Close your eyes, snuggle into your sleeping space, and listen to tonight's tale. The bird and bear men being dismissed, the Empress called both the sirens or fishmen and the worm men to deliver their observations which they had made both within the seas and the earth. First she inquired of the fishmen whence the saltiness of the sea did proceed, to which they answered that there was a volatile salt in those parts of the earth which as a bosom contained the waters of the sea, which salt, being imbibed by the sea, became fixed. And this imbibing motion was that they called the ebbing and flowing of the sea. For, said they, the rising and swelling of the water is caused by those parts of the volatile salt as are not so easily imbibed, which, striving to ascend above the water, bear it up with such a motion as man or some other animal creature in a violent exercise uses to take breath. This they affirmed to be the true cause both of the saltiness and the ebbing and flowing motion of the sea, and not the jogging of the earth or the secret influence of the moon, as some others had made the world believe. After this, the Empress inquired whether they had observed that all animal creatures within the seas and other waters had blood. They answered that some had blood, more or less, but some had none. In crayfishes and lobsters, said they, we perceive but little blood, but in crabs, oysters, cockles, etc., none at all. Then the Empress asked them in what part of their bodies that little blood did reside. They answered in a small vein, which in lobsters went through the middle of their tails, but in crayfishes was found in their backs. As for other sorts of fishes, some, said they, had only blood about their gills, and others in some other places of their bodies. But they had not as yet observed any whose veins did spread all over their bodies. The Empress, wondering that there could be living animals without blood, to be better satisfied, desired the worm men to inform her whether they had observed blood in all sorts of worms. They answered that as much as they could perceive, some had blood and some not. A moth, said they, had no blood at all, and a louse had, but like a lobster, a little vein along her back. Also nits, snails, and maggots, as well as those that are generated out of cheese and fruits, as those that are produced out of flesh, had no blood. But, replied the Empress, if those mentioned creatures have no blood, how is it possible they can live? For it is commonly said that the life of an animal consists in the blood, which is the seat of the animal spirits. They answered that blood was not a necessary propriety to the life of an animal, and that that which was commonly called animal spirits was nothing else but corporeal motions proper to the nature and figure of an animal. Then she asked both the fish and worm men whether all those creatures that have blood had a circulation of blood in their veins and arteries. But they answered that it was impossible to give Her Majesty an exact account thereof, by reason the circulation of blood was an interior motion, which their senses, neither of themselves nor by the help of any optic instrument, could perceive. But as soon as they had dissected an animal creature, to find out the truth thereof, the interior corporeal motions proper to that particular figure or creature were altered. Then said the Empress, if all animal creatures have not blood, it is certain they all have neither muscles, tendons, nerves, etc. But, said she, have you ever observed animal creatures that are neither flesh nor fish, but of an intermediate degree between both? Truly, answered both the fish and worm men, we have observed several animal creatures that live both in water and on the earth, indifferently, and if any, certainly those may be said to be of such a mixed nature, that is, partly flesh and partly fish. But how is it possible, replied the Empress, that they should live both in water and on the earth, since those animals that live by the respiration of air cannot live within water, and those that live in water cannot live by the respiration of air, as experience doth sufficiently witness. They answered Her Majesty that as there were different sorts of creatures, so they had also different ways of respirations. For respiration, said they, is nothing else but a composition and division of parts, and the motions of nature being infinitely various, it is impossible that all creatures should have the like motions. Wherefore it was not necessary that all animal creatures should be bound to live either by the air or by water only, but according as nature had ordered it convenient to their species. The Empress seemed very well satisfied with their answer, and desired to be further informed whether all animal creatures did continue their species by a successive propagation of particulars, and whether in every species the offspring did always resemble their generator or producer, both in their interior and exterior figures. They answered Her Majesty that some species, or sorts of creatures, were kept up by a successive propagation of an offspring that was like the producer, but some were not. Of the first rank, said they, are all those animals that are of different sexes, besides several others. But of the second rank are for the most part those we call insects, whose production proceeds from such causes as have no conformity or likeness with their produced effects, as, for example, maggots bred out of cheese, and several others generated out of earth, water, and the like. But, said the Empress, there is some likeness between maggots and cheese, for cheese has no blood, nor maggots neither. Besides, they have almost the same taste which cheese has. This proves nothing, answered they, for maggots have a visible, local, progressive motion, which cheese hath not. The Empress replied that when all the cheese was turned into maggots, it might be said to have local progressive motion. They answered that when the cheese by its own figurative motions was changed into maggots, it was no more cheese. The Empress confessed that she observed nature was infinitely various in her works, and that though the species of creatures did continue, yet their particulars were subject to infinite changes. But since you have informed me, said she, of the various sorts and productions of animal creatures, I desire you to tell me what you have observed of their sensitive perceptions. Truly, answered they, your Majesty puts a very hard question to us, and we shall hardly be able to give a satisfactory answer to it. For there are many different sorts of creatures, which as they have all different perceptions, so they have also different organs, which our senses are not able to discover. Only in an oyster shell we have with admiration observed that the common sensorium of the oyster lies just as the closing of the shells, where the pressure and reaction may be perceived by the opening and shutting of the shells every tide. After all this, the Empress desired the worm-men to give her a true relation how frost was made upon the earth. To which they answered that it was made much after the manner and description of the fish and bird-men, concerning the congelation of water into ice and snow, by a commixture of saline and acid particles, which relation added a great light to the ape-men, who were the chemists, concerning their chemical principles, salt, sulphur, and mercury. But, said the Empress, if it be so, it will require an infinite multitude of saline particles to produce such a great quantity of ice, frost, and snow. Besides, said she, when snow, ice, and frost turn again into their former principle, I would fain know what becomes of those saline particles. But neither the worm-men nor the fish and bird-men could give her an answer to it. Then the Empress inquired of them the reason why springs were not as salt as the sea is. Also, why some did ebb and flow. To which it was answered that the ebbing and flowing of some springs was caused by hollow caverns within the earth, where the sea-water crowding through did thrust forward, and drew backward the spring-water, according to its own way of ebbing and flowing. But others said that it proceeded from a small proportion of saline and acid particles, which the spring-water imbibed from the earth, and although it was not so much as to be perceived by the sense of taste, yet it was enough to cause an ebbing and flowing motion. And as for the spring-water being fresh, they gave, according to their observation, this following reason. There is, said they, a certain heat within the bowels of the earth, proceeding from its swift circular motion upon its own axis, which heat distills the rarest parts of the earth into a fresh and insipid water, which water being through the pores of the earth conveyed into a place where it may break forth without resistance or obstruction, causes springs and fountains. And these distilled waters within the earth do nourish and refresh the grosser and drier parts thereof. This relation confirmed the Empress in the opinion concerning the motion of the earth and the fixedness of the sun, as the birdmen had informed her. And then she asked the worm-men whether minerals and vegetables were generated by the same heat that is within the bowels of the earth, to which they could give her no positive answer. Only this they affirmed, that heat and cold were not the primary producing causes of either vegetables or minerals, or other sorts of creatures, but only effects. And to prove this our assertion, said they, we have observed that by change of some sorts of corporeal motions, that which is now hot will become cold, and what is now cold will grow hot. But the hottest place of all we find to be the center of the earth. Neither do we observe that the torrid zone does contain so much gold and silver as the temperate. Nor is there great store of iron and lead wheresoever there is gold, for these metals are most found in colder climates towards either of the poles. This observation the Empress commanded them to confer with her chemists, the ape-men, to let them know that gold was not produced by a violent but a temperate degree of heat. She asked further whether gold could not be made by art. They answered that they could not certainly tell Her Majesty, but if it was possible to be done, they thought tin, lead, brass, iron, and silver to be the fittest metals for such an artificial transmutation. Then she asked them whether art could produce iron, tin, lead, or silver. They answered not in their opinion. Then I perceive, replied the Empress, that your judgments are very irregular, since you believe that gold, which is so fixed a metal that nothing has been found as yet which could occasion a dissolution of its interior figure, may be made by art, and not tin, lead, iron, copper, or silver, which yet are so far weaker and meaner metals than gold is. But the worm-men excused themselves that they were ignorant in that art, and that such questions belonged more properly to the ape-men, which were Her Majesty's chemists. Then the Empress asked them whether by their sensitive perceptions they could observe the interior corporeal figurative motions both of vegetables and minerals. They answered that their senses could perceive them after they were produced, but not before. Nevertheless, said they, although the interior figurative motions of natural creatures are not subject to the exterior animal sensitive perceptions, yet by their rational perception they may judge of them, and of their productions, if they be regular. Whereupon the Empress commanded the bear-men to lend them some of their best microscopes. At which the bear-men smilingly answered Her Majesty that their glasses would do them but little service in the bowels of the earth, because there was no light. For, said they, our glasses do only represent exterior objects, according to the various reflections and positions of light. And wheresoever light is wanting, the glasses will do no good. To which the worm-men replied, that although they could not say much of refractions, reflections, inflections, and the like, yet were they not blind, even in the bowels of the earth. For they could see the several sorts of minerals, as also minute animals, that lived there, which minute animal creatures were not blind either, but had some kind of sensitive perception that was as serviceable to them as sight, taste, smell, touch, hearing, etc., was to other animal creatures. By which it is evident that nature has been as bountiful to those creatures that live underground or in the bowels of the earth as to those that live upon the surface of the earth, or in the air, or in water. But howsoever, proceeded the worm-men, although there is light in the bowels of the earth, yet your microscopes will do but little good there, by reason those creatures that live underground have not such an optic sense as those that live on the surface of the earth. Wherefore, unless you had such glasses as are proper for their perception, your microscopes will not be any ways advantageous to them. The Empress seemed well pleased with this answer of the worm-men, and asked them further, whether minerals and all other creatures within the earth were colorless. At which question they could not forbear laughing. And when the Empress asked the reason why they laughed, "We most humbly beg your Majesty's pardon," replied they, "for we could not choose but laugh, when we heard of a colorless body." "Why," said the Empress, "color is only an accident, which is an immaterial thing, and has no being of itself, but in another body." "Those," replied they, "that informed your Majesty thus, surely their rational motions were very irregular, for how is it possible that a natural nothing can have a being in nature? If it be no substance, it cannot have a being, and if no being, it is nothing. Wherefore the distinction between subsisting of itself and subsisting in another body is a mere nicety, and nonsense, for there is nothing in nature that can subsist of or by itself, I mean singly, by reason all parts of nature are composed in one body, and though they may be infinitely divided, commixed, and changed in their particular, yet in general parts cannot be separated from parts as long as nature lasts. Nay, we might as probably affirm that infinite nature would be as soon destroyed as that one atom could perish. And therefore your Majesty may firmly believe that there is no body without color, nor no color without body. For color, figure, place, magnitude, and body are all but one thing, without any separation or abstraction from each other. The Empress was so wonderfully taken with this discourse of the worm-men that she not only pardoned the rudeness they committed in laughing at first at her question, but yielded a full assent to their opinion, which she thought the most rational that she had heard yet. And then, proceeding in her questions, enquired further, whether they had observed any seminal principles within the earth free from all dimensions and qualities, which produced vegetables, minerals, and the like. To which they answered, that concerning the seeds of minerals, their sensitive perceptions had never observed any, but vegetables had certain seeds out of which they were produced. Then she asked whether those seeds of vegetables lost their species, that is, were annihilated in the production of their offspring. To which they answered that by an annihilation nothing could be produced, and that the seeds of vegetables were so far from being annihilated in their productions that they did rather numerously increase and multiply. For the division of one seed, said they, does produce numbers of seeds out of itself. But, replied the Empress, a particular part cannot increase of itself. 'Tis true, answered they, but they increase not barely of themselves, but by joining and commixing with other parts, which do assist them in their productions, and by way of imitation form or figure their own parts into such or such particulars. Then I pray inform me, said the Empress, what disguise those seeds put on, and how they do conceal themselves in their transmutations. They answered that seeds did no ways disguise or conceal, but rather divulge themselves in the multiplication of their offspring. Only they did hide and conceal themselves from their sensitive perceptions, so that their figurative and productive motions were not perceptible by animal creatures. Again the Empress asked them whether there were any non-beings within the earth. To which they answered that they never heard of any such thing, and that, if Her Majesty would know the truth thereof, she must ask those creatures that are called immaterial spirits, which had a great affinity with non-beings, and perhaps could give her a satisfactory answer to this question. Then she desired to be informed what opinion they had of the beginning of forms. They told Her Majesty that they did not understand what she meant by this expression. For, said they, there is no beginning in nature, no, not of particulars. By reason nature is eternal and infinite, and her particulars are subject to infinite changes and transmutations by virtue of their own corporeal figurative self-motions. So that there's nothing new in nature, not properly a beginning of anything. The Empress seemed well satisfied with all those answers, and enquired further whether there was no art used by those creatures that live within the earth. Yes, answered they, for the several parts of the earth do join and assist each other in composition or framing of such or such particulars. And many times there are factions and divisions which cause productions of mixed species, as, for example, weeds instead of sweet flowers and useful fruits. But gardeners and husbandmen use often to decide their quarrels and cause them to agree, which, though it shows a kindness to the differing parties, yet 'tis a great prejudice to the worms and other animal creatures that live underground, for it most commonly causes their dissolution and ruin. At best they are driven out of their habitations. What, said the Empress, are not worms produced out of the earth? Their production in general, answered they, is like the production of all other natural creatures, proceeding from the corporeal figurative motions of nature. But as for their particular productions, they are according to the nature of their species. Some are produced out of flowers, some out of roots, some out of fruits, some out of ordinary earth. Then they are very ungrateful children, replied the Empress, that they feed on their own parents which gave them life, Their life, answered they, is their own, and not their parents', for no part or creature of nature can either give or take away life, but parts do only assist and join with parts, either in dissolution or production of other parts and creatures. Stay tuned for the next section of The Blazing World by the Duchess of Newcastle. Please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. Keep in touch with us on Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, and recommend us to anyone you know who could use a quiet break or a little help falling asleep. Exploration Dreamland is produced, edited, and hosted by me, Sarah Van Zaley. A big thank you to Project Gutenberg and LibriVox for helping me find many interesting publications. Thanks also to Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com for providing the theme music for this show. The title of this piece is Kalimba Relaxation Music, if you would like to visit his website to hear it in its entirety. Sweet dreams.